The first thing I heard when I opened my eyes was the slow, merciless beep of a heart monitor. The second thing I saw was the woman I had spent 3 years trying to forget, my ex-girlfriend's mother, sitting beside my hospital bed with tears running silently down her face. She looked older than I remembered, frightened in a way I had never seen before. But what truly terrified me was the envelope clutched tightly in her hands. Before I could ask why she was there, she whispered something that made my entire body go cold. She had been carrying a secret for almost 2 years, and it was time I knew the truth. My name is Daniel, and before that hospital room, I thought my life had already taught me everything it could about heartbreak. I had once believed that love meant staying when things became difficult, forgiving when apologies were sincere, and fighting for someone even when the world told you to walk away. Then I met Emily. She was the kind of person who made ordinary days feel important. We spent late evenings walking through quiet streets, talking about our dreams, our future, and the little house we promised we would someday share. I loved her with the kind of love that makes you stop imagining a life without someone. But love can be destroyed by things that have nothing to do with how deeply two people care for each other. Emily's father had always considered me beneath his daughter. I wasn't wealthy, connected, or impressive enough for his plans. He wanted Emily with someone who could give her a life of luxury, and eventually his pressure became unbearable. Emily started pulling away. Her messages became shorter. Our plans disappeared one by one. Then, one rainy evening, she ended everything. She told me she needed a different life and that I had to stop trying to hold her back. I begged her to tell me if there was another man, but she looked away and said there wasn't. I believed her. That was what made losing her so painful. I didn't hate her. I simply couldn't understand why the woman who once promised forever had suddenly decided that forever wasn't worth fighting for. Her mother, Margaret, was different. She had always treated me kindly, even when her husband made it clear that I wasn't welcome. On the night Emily ended our relationship, Margaret found me standing outside their house in the rain. She didn't ask questions. She simply opened the door, handed me a towel, and told me that sometimes people made decisions they believed were necessary, even when those decisions broke other people's hearts. I never forgot her kindness, but after that night, I stayed away from their family. I needed to heal. For almost 2 years, I rebuilt my life. I worked harder, moved into a small apartment, and stopped looking at old photographs. I didn't become rich or famous. I simply became stronger. I learned to eat dinner alone without feeling lonely. I learned to wake up without checking my phone for a message that would never come. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes closure doesn't come from another person. Sometimes you have to give it to yourself. Then came the accident. It happened on a cold Thursday evening when I was driving home from work. A truck lost control at an intersection, and everything happened so quickly that I barely had time to react. I remember the sound of metal twisting, glass breaking, and someone screaming. Then there was darkness. When I woke up in the hospital, my body felt as if it had been filled with stones. My head throbbed. My ribs burned every time I breathed. My right arm was wrapped heavily, and wires surrounded me like I had become part of a machine. I tried to remember who had brought me there, but my memories came in broken pieces. Then I saw Margaret. She stood when she noticed my eyes were open, and for a moment she looked like she might collapse. She came toward me slowly, holding an envelope against her chest. I couldn't understand why she was there. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly 2 years. She told me she had received a call from the hospital because my emergency contact information still contained an old number connected to someone in Emily's family. She had rushed there immediately. But there was something else. Something she had promised herself she would tell me only when the time was right. She placed the envelope on my blanket. Inside was a letter. The handwriting was unmistakably Emily's. My heart began pounding harder than the monitor beside me. I hadn't heard her name spoken in months. Seeing her handwriting again felt like opening a door I had spent 2 years trying to keep locked. Margaret begged me not to read it until I was strong enough. But I couldn't stop myself. The letter began with an apology. Emily wrote that she had never stopped loving me. She wrote that the night she broke up with me, she had been lying. There had been another reason, one she had been too afraid to tell me. Her father had discovered that she was pregnant. I stopped breathing for a moment. The letter explained that Emily had been terrified. Her father had threatened to cut her off financially, destroy my career, and make sure I never saw the child if she stayed with me. He told her that if she wanted to protect me, she had to make me believe she no longer loved me. But the biggest secret came next. Emily had given birth to a baby girl. My daughter. Her name was Lily. For almost 2 years, I had been living without knowing that somewhere in the world there was a little girl who had my eyes. I looked at Margaret, unable to speak. She was crying now. She admitted that she had wanted to tell me from the beginning. But Emily's father had controlled the situation so completely that Margaret was afraid. She had secretly visited Lily whenever she could. She had watched the little girl grow up while carrying the guilt of knowing that her biological father had no idea she existed. Then Margaret revealed something even more painful. Emily had never abandoned me. She had been writing letters to me throughout those 2 years. Dozens of them. Her father had taken every one before they reached me. Margaret had recovered the letters after his health began failing and the truth finally came out within their family. Emily had planned to tell me everything herself. She had planned to bring Lily to meet me. But she never got the chance. 3 months earlier, Emily had died unexpectedly from an illness she had kept private because she didn't want anyone's pity. I stared at Margaret as the hospital room blurred around me. The woman I had spent years believing had chosen another life was gone. And she had left behind a daughter I had never held. Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph. It showed a little girl sitting on a wooden bench beneath a tree. She had dark hair, curious eyes, and a smile that looked painfully familiar. On the back of the photograph were 5 words. Please tell her I loved her. I broke. Not quietly. Not gracefully. I cried the way people cry when years of pain suddenly find a way out. I cried for Emily. I cried for the child who had grown up without knowing her father. I cried for the years that could never be returned. And most of all, I cried because I finally understood that what I had called rejection had actually been sacrifice. Margaret didn't try to comfort me with empty words. She simply held my hand. When I was discharged several weeks later, I went with Margaret to meet Lily. I was terrified. What if she didn't accept me? What if I didn't know how to be a father? What if 2 missing years could never be repaired? Then the front door opened. Lily stood there holding a stuffed rabbit. She looked at me for several seconds. Margaret introduced me simply as someone who had known her mother very well. Lily studied my face and then asked if I was the man in the photograph. I nodded. She smiled. Then she ran toward me. That first hug nearly destroyed me. She didn't know everything. She didn't understand the years of secrets or the cruelty that had kept us apart. She only knew that somehow, this stranger felt familiar. I knelt down and held her as carefully as my injured body allowed. From that day forward, I promised myself I would never let another day disappear without telling her how loved she was. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. I had to learn how to be a father. Lily had questions I couldn't always answer. Some nights she missed her mother so badly that nothing could make her smile. I missed Emily too, even after everything. Grief became something we carried together rather than something we suffered alone. Margaret became part of our little family as well. She told me that she had spent years believing she had failed her daughter. I told her she hadn't. She had protected Lily when she could. She had finally told me the truth. And sometimes, when life gives you a second chance, the bravest thing you can do is accept it. Months later, Lily and I planted a small tree in the backyard. She said it was for her mother. I said it was also for everything we had lost. Then she took my hand and said that maybe it could be for everything we were going to find too. She was right. That tree grew slowly. So did we. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And leave a comment if you believe kindness can survive even the hardest circumstances, and that people sometimes deserve a second chance before we judge the choices they made. Years later, whenever I looked at that tree, I remembered the hospital room where my entire understanding of the past had changed. I had woken up believing I had lost everything. Instead, I discovered that something had been waiting for me all along, a little girl with her mother's smile, a grandmother carrying a secret she could no longer hide, and a second chance at a family I never knew I had. Sometimes the greatest heartbreak in our lives is not the end of our story. Sometimes it is the chapter that makes us ready for the one we were never expecting. If this story touched your heart, please support the video with a like, share it with someone who believes in forgiveness, and subscribe for more stories about kindness, hope, and second chances. And before you go, comment, "Second chances matter," if you believe that even after years of pain, one act of honesty and love can change a person's entire life. Because sometimes, when we think life has taken something away from us, it is quietly preparing to give us something we never knew we needed. For me, that gift had a name. Lily. And every morning she wakes up and calls me Dad, I remember that the darkest night of my life didn't end with loss. It ended with a beginning.